it's good of you to come out tonight to listen to what we've got to say. I do wish there had been more people, and you can see the uphill struggle that we've got with apathy within the fishing industry to get that message out there. But you know, let's go back a few years to a socialist politician and the man regarded as the father of the NHS, Nye Bevan. Nye once said of Britain, "This island is made mainly of coal and surrounded by fish. Only an organising genius could produce a shortage of coal and fish at the same time." Well, 70 years after this famous statement, the UK is devoid of coal production, and what remains of the fishing industry is teetering on the edge of oblivion. And I'm sure Bevan is spinning in his grave. For me, the British fishing industry is more than a mere political portfolio. Unlike many of the politicians I sit with day in and day out, I believe the future of fishing deserves more than the mere lip service many of them pay it. The fishing industry has been my way of life for as long as I can remember, having been born and brought up within the Hessle Road fishing community of Hull in the late 50s, 60s and 70s. My grandfather worked his entire life on the fish dock. My father was a fish filleter. My uncle Harry spent his entire life working on deep sea trawlers. My brother Keith paid the ultimate price to feed this country when, as a crew member of the Ross Cleveland, it capsized off the Icelandic coast. And as a lad, everyone I knew worked in some capacity with fish. At its height, the fishing industry provided thousands of jobs, whether at sea, onshore, or in retail areas up and down the country. But no longer, I'm afraid. In 1973, the Conservative government, led by Edward Heath, took us into what was then the common market, the forerunner to the EU. And as always with politics, there was a price to pay for our continental union. This came in the form of wholesale sell-out of our waters, our fish, and our fishing communities to the Common Fisheries Policy, which all came about through a last-minute demand by the French. The introduction of the CFP soon heralded a decline in the fishing industry that goes unmatched in any other sector. With a one-size-fits-all policy that could never work in a mixed fishery like the UK's. We've seen tightening regulations, reducing quotas, and a spectacular reduction in the number of British vessels. When mixed with the rise of flagships harvesting quota and fish alike, the whole situation has spelt disaster for the once mighty British fishing fleet. Today, what's left of the British fleet faces a desperate fight for survival. And following Theresa May's Chequers Brexit deal and Gove's Fisheries White Paper, there will be no Brexit for the vast majority of British fishers. Now, of course, I'm speaking about the hard-working, low-impact vessels that operate from coastal communities up and down the country, rather than the quota-heavy big boys and the foreign-owned flagships that dominate the British fisheries today. Theresa May, or Theresa May as I like to call her, together with her ministerial cohorts in the cabinet, have now constructed the worst possible scenario for coastal communities. The very first line of Gove's Fisheries White Paper gives the game away when it says, UK fisheries policy will align with the agreement reached with the EU. Now the word align sends shivers through me. As in EU speak, it means that we, the UK, will agree to whatever terms are dictated to us from Brussels. Time and again in Fisheries Committee meetings, I am told by my European counterparts that the UK will never be allowed control of our seas, that the waters are European rather than British, and how disastrous to the EU fishing industry it would be if the UK was to establish a 200-mile EEZ. The White Paper goes on to say, and I quote, Fisheries will be a separate strand of our future relationship with the EU. Through the fisheries strand, the EU and the UK as an independent coastal state will negotiate on access to waters and fishing opportunities on an annual basis. Let me ask you this question. When did the British spirit become so broken that we lost the ability to fight for what is rightfully ours? Our ability to determine what is right for Britain and all its industries, and our ability to assert ourselves on the international stage. Rather than allowing the unelected bureaucrats of the EU telling us what we can and can't have in our waters, why is our government not saying, this is what we need to make the British fishing industry successful, and this is what you can have? The Tories have got the whole negotiation the wrong way round, tugging the nation's forelock and asking how high every time the EU says jump. But the real kicker surrounding Gove's paper on the betrayal of British fishing was when he announced UK fishers would get a fairer share. A fairer share. From our discussions with fishers large and small across the country, no one voted for a few more fish being thrown their way, while flagships and EU conglomerates continue to hover the UK's seas of fish. No one voted to allow Brussels to continue to dictate the terms how we manage UK fisheries. And I can almost guarantee that no one voted to let the EU continue to manage quota or allow continued equal access to UK waters, as Gove pretty much sets out in his white paper. Gove even admits that little will change when he says, we do not intend to change the method for allocating existing quota, before sugaring the pill by saying there will be a new allocation methodology for additional fishing opportunities agreed from December 2020 onwards. Now, as wishy-washy as the Fisheries White Paper is, everything contained in it depends upon the final deal Theresa May negotiates with the EU. And so far, the smoke signals are not too good on this. In my honest opinion, I now think May is so desperate to get a deal at any cost, she would willingly give the EU anything they ask for. Based on the attitudes to fisheries I come across each day and every day in the European Parliament, I can already say, without a doubt, that the EU fully expect little change for fisheries following Brexit. Equally as concerning is getting the fishing industry through the disastrous May sellout that is the implementation period. During this period, there will be no British MEPs to temper the EU's plans for our waters, nor any input from the European Council. Instead, we will have at best a few indoctrinated civil servants observing what is happening. Does anyone in this room realistically think that the EU will let the UK have any say on our fisheries during this transition period? No, me neither. It's an absolute joke. As we have little enough say on what happens in our waters as an EU member, the simple fact is, with this transition deal, the Tories have now betrayed the fishing industry on the way into the EU and shafted the same sector on the way out. Following the Tories' betrayal, the EU is now primed to squeeze the life out of what remains of the British fishing industry. Therefore, we can expect further reductions in quotas, the placing of new bans on certain species, and the EU being as obstructive as possible to any efforts to rebuild. The only way to stop the second fishing betrayal is to unite as an industry with one voice and fight for what is one of Britain's greatest natural assets. To understand how productive the UK's fishing industries could be, you only have to look at the model used in Iceland. If you speak to the likes of Lord Prescott, they will tell you that the EU has little to do with the decline of the British fishing industry. They say the losses are due to the Icelandic cod wars and the greed of British fishermen. Well, I lived through the cod wars, and I can tell you the Icelandic government realised the importance of their fishing grounds, their fish stocks, and their fishing fleets, and they fought for them. With the opportunities provided by Brexit, the UK now finds itself in a similar position to that of Iceland in the 50s, 60s and 70s. In the 70s, political arrogance caused people like Ted Heath to believe a small nation like Iceland, who have no military, could never stop the might of Britain catching fish in the waters. Therefore, Heath and his common market obsessed colleagues were happy to sell out over 70% of the UK's actual rights as the price for joining the EU. When Iceland finally achieved what many thought impossible and secured their exclusive economic zone, Britain was left with no Icelandic catch and vastly reduced rights in our own home fisheries due to shared access. This situation is one that the British industry has struggled to cope with ever since. Today, the Icelandic fishing industry is booming. Many Icelandic companies have even been successfully invested in the EU fishing industry, often at the expense of UK fishermen, through the use of EU-registered but wholly owned subsidiary companies. In my opinion, come March 2019, under international law, EU trawlers should no longer have any entitlement to fish British waters. The fact is, given the opportunities, the private and public investment and political support from the government, the British fishing industry could be worth an estimated £6.3 billion to the UK economy. However, Brexit does not mean every British vessel will suddenly drain the seas of fish, as was recently suggested by Lord Prescott, who made the statement while branding British fishermen greedy. And I'm yet to meet a skipper who does not want fishing to be sustainable, not only to provide a future income, but also to have something to pass down to future generations. What people of Prescott's ilk fail to say is that even if we stick to the total allowable catch set by the EU for UK waters, British vessels could have an extra 683,000 tonnes of fish to catch. What these people also fail to recognise is that over 70% of the UK's fishing fleet was never given UK quota when the system was first introduced. And unlike other places in the world, UK fishing quota is monetised. It's a monetised possession that can be bought and sold. Elsewhere, quota belongs to the nation, and if you don't use it, you'll lose it. The fact UK quota, also known as FQA, is a wholly owned entity has enabled the rise of slipper skippers, corporate investors and a near takeover of British fishing interests by foreign entities. This has left many vessels, especially vessels under 10 metres, who were not included in the original quota carve-up, struggling to either buy or rent quota in this completely unregulated market, forcing many out of business altogether. Now, due to the way the market in UK fishing opportunities has developed, we now have a situation where only 300 of the 2,789 registered fishing vessels in England fish 97% of all UK quota. That's 300 vessels of 2,789 registered fishing vessels. They fish 97% of all UK quota. This leaves a mere 3% of UK quota for the remaining 2,489 vessels working in British waters. So it doesn't take a genius to work out how wrong this is. As with many elements of the CFP, the producer organisations which were set up by the EU to administrate quota have failed to deliver any of the promised benefits to small, low-impact vessels. While I recognise some British POs take their responsibilities to small and medium-scale fishermen seriously and help where they can, many do not. In fact, many POs across Europe are systematically doing the opposite of developing small-scale fisheries, with many only representing the interests of large fishing interests. Today, the under-resourced MMO makes no effort to even identify the ultimate controlling interests of UK FQAs. This means the MMO, and by extension, the government, is blind to the true nature of UK fishing opportunities. Now, understanding who controls fishing interests also highlights how there is now a network of large fishing companies wielding significant influence in and across member states, with little evidence to show that anything is being done to control this situation. This is just one of many aspects of mismanagement and centralisation of resources that has blighted the UK fishing industry since joining the CFP. Now, I could go on all night about the many facets of the CFP that blight the British fishing industry, from discards to electro-pulse fishing, the ban on catching bass, and over-regulation from the EU. There are many to choose from. But despite the many issues, we see yet another Conservative government poised to betray what remains of the UK's fishing industry. To me, this betrayal is the biggest up yours possible to an industry that unanimously voted Brexit. The EU has only one reason to push so hard for fishing to be included in the transitional deal, and that is to destroy what remains of the British fishing fleet and to use international law to claim any unused quota in UK waters if we ever regain control of our seas. But this situation is not just the fault of the Conservatives, as the pro-EU Labour Party are no better. On two separate occasions this year, Labour MEPs have voted down motions in the European Parliament aimed at ending the UK adherence to the Common Fisheries Policy and establishing a 200-mile EEZ. All the traditional parties have used a smoke and mirrors approach to fool the 17.4 million people who voted Brexit and achieve the aim of keeping us tied to the EU any way they can. This became truly obvious when the Prime Minister quoted from the EU's Book of Phraseology on fisheries and Brexit in a recent Mansion House speech. The PM's definition of continuing to work together actually means continued dictation of fishing rules from Brussels. For continuation to manage shared stocks, read continued EU pillaging of fish stocks from UK waters. And for continued reciprocal access, read continued domination of UK waters by EU fishing vessels. While the Prime Minister was keen to outline in her recent Brexit speech, and I quote again, "No community in Britain would ever be left behind again," she seems to be forgetting the continued loss of thousands of jobs in coastal communities due to allowing the CFP to continue. The fact is, the British fishing industry is being slowly killed off by ever-tightening EU quotas, more and more flagships, and less interest from government in supporting the industry. Now is the time for action. After the sell-off of our rich resources and our heritage, there is a great deal of work to do to return Britain's fishing grounds to British fishermen. Sadly, many thought our vote to leave the European Union in June 2016 was the end of the long, hard fight. Instead, it heralded the beginning of the true battle. The only way to make politicians listen is to mobilise as a united industry, speak with one voice, act with one voice, and protest with one voice. Anything less will see the betrayal of British fishing complete. Thank you very much.